Hi, I'm Milena. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to a very spontaneous video where I want to talk about one of my favorite purchases for my bookish room. This is the A to Z female authors Bookishly. I want to say calendar, but it's not a calendar, it's a poster that has 26 female authors. I bought this poster, of course, because I recognized many faces of whom I had enjoyed books, but I never really considered how many of these women I've actually read from. So I have purchased my shelves looking for the books that I've read by these authors, and I thought we could look at them together. When I stumble upon an author I have not read from before, I would love a recommendation from you if you have any. So these authors are quite varied. We have authors that are publishing today, and we have authors that have been gone for a long time, like we have Charlotte Brontë and Emily Dickinson. But we're just going to start at the very beginning. So number one is Agatha Christie, the Queen of Mystery. I have read Murder on the Orient Express and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't that impressed. I didn't really find it anything special. It was really a 3-star read for me, but I've heard so many people talk about and then there were none. So I would like to read that one at some point. So one author down. Author number 2 is Bernardine Evaristo, and I've read 2 books by her. The first one I read is Girl, Woman, Other, which is a literary fiction novel that discusses a lot of different characters. In a way, it kind of felt like a generational story. It isn't really, but it had that kind of feel. Another book is The Emperor's Babe, which is historical fiction set in 211 AD about a woman who, I think she's enslaved to be the emperor's babe. But it's been a long time since I read this. I enjoyed this one and I really loved this one. I don't think there's anything on Bernardine Evaristo's backlist I want to read. So if she comes out with anything new, I am really curious to see if that is something that I would want to read. Author number 3, can you have a guess? All the Tabs is Charlotte Brontë, and of course I also co-host for the readalongs, so I have read all of her novels, starting with The Professor, which I read twice, Jane Eyre, which I also read twice, Shirley, and Villette. My favorite is, I think, Villette or Jane Eyre. Villette is, in my opinion, a better novel, but I would want to reread either of them for enjoyment. I would go for Jane Eyre because I think that is the most enjoyable novel that Charlotte Brontë wrote. There's nothing else for me to read by Charlotte Brontë, although I do think there's an unfinished novel called Emma, but I don't know how unfinished that is. I might just have a look at it out of curiosity. Then we head over to another author I've read a lot from, and that is Daphne du Maurier. I have read The Birds, My Cousin Rachel, Jamaica Inn, Frenchman's Creek, and Rebecca. I'm not really sure which one is my favorite because I honestly really love them all. Maybe My Cousin Rachel is my favorite. Frenchman's Creek was most surprising to me and was the biggest adventure to read. But then maybe objectively Rebecca is the best? I don't know, I enjoyed them all. I have more Daphne du Maurier on my TBR because she wrote so much. Number 5 is Our First Poet, I believe, and that is Emily Dickinson. And by Emily Dickinson I have read a collection of her letters, which was a book club read I think about 2 years ago, and I really enjoyed reading Emily Dickinson's letters. And then I've also read a fair few of her poems. Emily Dickinson is one of my favorite poets, although having said that I don't read that much poetry, but I haven't read this whole collection. Oh, I even have a bookmark right here on page 58, but this is a really big collection of 200 pages. I think I will get back to it at some point. Then on number 6 we have Frances Hodgson Burnett. I did read The Secret Garden and I really disliked it, so I won't be going back to that author. Another author I have a big pile for. Oh my gosh, this is partly TBR, partly read, but that is this whole pile. And author number 7 is George Eliot. So I think this is the right order, but I'm not sure. The Mail on the Floss, Silas Marner, Romola, and Middlemarch. It's not hard to say which one is my favorite because that is definitely Middlemarch. These favorites I'm not really sure. It's also not necessary, is it? The 2 that I have on my TBR are Anne and Beat, Daniel Deronda, which I will read this one first because it was published earlier, but my highest expectations are definitely for Daniel Deronda. Author number 8 is Harper Lee, and I have not read anything from her, although How to Kill a Mockingbird has been floating on my TBR for a while, but I've heard mixed things about it. from the perspective of white saviorism, so I'm not sure if I should still read it. Let me know if it's still worth a read. Author number 9 is Iris Murdoch, and I have a vague association with her name, but I couldn't name any title. I'm sure I will read something by her in the future. Author number 10 is Jane Austen, and I have read all of Jane Austen's novels, starting with Northanger Abbey, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Mansfield Park, and Persuasion. I'm going to be very basic and say that Pride and Prejudice is my favorite. Mansfield Park was a really pleasant surprise though. And I also just really like Emma because it has a special place in my heart. Author number 11 is Kamala Suraya, which I have not read anything from. Author number 12 is Louisa May Alcott, and kind of course, I've read Little Women. This has only the first part. I know that there are many continuations of Little Women. I thought this was okay. I liked it. I had a good time reading it, but it was a little bit too moralistic for my liking. And I don't think I will continue with the Little Women series. I'm just not that interested by Louisa May Alcott's writing. I do have to say I really do like the film adaptations of Little Women. Just the writing isn't really for me. Author number 13 is Maya Angelou, and I have read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. At the time I really enjoyed this. Reflecting, I'm not sure how much I still enjoy it, but I would have to reread it to be really sure. I read this with a book club and it made a good impression on me at the time. I do know that Maya Angelou has written, I think, letters to my daughters, which I'm really curious about because she didn't have a daughter herself, but she wrote letters to a fictional author about how to live her life, I think less as a woman, things like that, which I will be interested to read. Author number 14 is Nancy Mitford. I have never read anything by Nancy Mitford, but I do have a book on my TBR by her, and that is The Pursuit of Love. Author number 15 is Octavia E. Butler, and she wrote one of my favorite time travel historical fictions, which is Kindred. I've also recently watched the TV series, which I would highly recommend even if you haven't read the book. It is a really interesting exploration of time travel in America. And then she also wrote this series. I'm not sure what the series itself is actually called. I have read Parable of the Sower. This is a dystopian classic. Yeah, it's a dystopian classic about a girl who grows up in a really dark world where there is not enough food, there's not enough water, and then her town gets raided, and we follow her as she thinks a lot about religion but also about human relationships, and eventually she forms a cult. And I really do want to read this one, Parable of the Talents, because it is about what happens after she has formed that cult. But I haven't yet. Author number 16 is again an author I have not really heard from before, and that is B.L. Travers. So I don't know if I will read anything by her or if I will like it. Author number 17 is Kuralettin Haider. I have never read anything by this author. If you have a recommendation, then please let me know. Author number 18 is a poet, and that is Ruby Kaur. I apologize if I say the last name wrong. My Dutch tongue has a really hard time pronouncing that last name. I have read some poetry by her. It is very experimental, very modern, very Instagram poetry-like, and I just generally don't dwell with modern poetry. It's quite a unique experience for me to actually enjoy it, and I really didn't enjoy this, unfortunately. Number 19 is Sylvia Plath, and I have of course read The Bell Jar, which is her only novel. There are some problems. I think some parts in this book are quite controversial, and I'm not talking about the mental health. At the time of reading a few years ago, I did give it 5 stars. I read the poetry collection The Colossus, which I enjoyed that part, but it was, I think, somewhere between a 2 and a 3 star because some things were a bit controversial and not in a good way. The same with Ariel, which I love this edition, but I really had some issues with some of the poems. Having said that, I think writing wise the poetry is gorgeous. I also read Mary Ventura, which is a short story, again writing beautiful, thematically problematic. So yes, I have a complicated relationship with Sylvia Plath, but as a writer she was incredibly talented. Author number 20 is Tove Jansson, and I have very recently read Moominland in Midwinter. Tove Jansson is the author of The Moomins, and I'm sure that you know The Moomins, whether you know them from the comics or TV, but the author behind them is Tove Jansson, and I really want to read the rest of these because it was an absolute joy to read. Author number 1 is Ursula K. Le Guin, who was an early fantasy writer, and I've heard a lot of good things about her books. Not necessarily from a modern perspective in a way that it is very readable as more modern fantasy, but that she explores a lot of interesting themes when it comes to environment and feminism. So I think when I'm kind of there in my fantasy journey, I would like to pick up her series or at least a book by her. Then author 22 is Virginia Woolf, and I have read most novels by Virginia Woolf, not all of them. My favorite one is To the Lighthouse, which I've read I think 2 times. I can never remember if I've read it 2 times or 3 times. Virginia Woolf is an author whose writing really fascinates me. I do have a whole playlist on me talking about her books, including a beginner's guide to her works. So if you're interested in that, then I will link that down below. Author number 23 and 24 are again authors I've not heard from before, which is exciting. Lilac author. I have not heard of this author before, so if you have a recommendation, let me know. Same goes for author 24, which is Xinran. Author 25 is Yagashi, and I today actually finished my first book by Yagashi, which is Homecoming, and it's going to be one of my all-time favorites. I gave it 5 stars. This book radiates power. It's so hard to say, but I feel like the power just burns off these pages. I am really impressed by this. My next book by Yagashi, and the only other novel first I know that she wrote, is Transcended Kingdom, and I cannot wait to start this. The last author, author 26, is Zadie Smith, and years ago I read Springtime. I think I read it when it just came out. I liked it, but it wasn't anything special to me. I had a good time reading it. And I do remember some things about it. It doesn't really compare to other similar novels for me. One that I have on my TBR is N.W., which is set in London, and I always really enjoy that. So that leaves me with the final count, and that is that I've read from 15, it's actually 17, counting is hard, of 26 authors, which makes sense why I recognize so many faces and was so excited to buy this poster. I will of course leave a link to, I think I bought it through Etsy, but I think Bookishly also has a website if you are within the UK. I will leave an international link. It's not a very cheap poster, but I'm happy I bought it because it's really worth it for me. It is also really great quality. It's really thick. It won't tear that easily. So yes, this was a fun experiment. I have a lot of books around me now. Thank you so much for sitting down with me, for having a little chat, and I hope that you have a lovely day or evening, and I hope to see you in another video. Doei!